All right, folks, day 4. Let's get right into it. Um, Make sure that you have out day 4. Make sure that I have out day 4. The worksheet is actually going to be really important. So please, please, please make sure that you have it. Okay. So day 4, how can population or how can we evaluate the factors affecting populations in an ecosystem? Remember, a population, well, a group of organisms of, let me just put like organisms. That means that they're all from the same species. Okay. Which type of model provides the most complete representation of the feeding relationships within a community? Remember, a community has all of the um, biotic factors that are interacting with each other. All right. Now, for biotic factors, what we should get is a food web, right? Material cycle does not involve biotic factors. A predator-prey association, not every organism on Earth has that type of relationship. A food chain is pretty accurate, but the most accurate is a food web because it shows all of the different types of organisms that another organism can consume or obtain its energy from. Number 2, the diagram below represents a food pyramid. The concentration of the pesticide DDT. So a pesticide is any type of agent or substance or chemical that's used to kill pests such as rodents or cockroaches, things like that. In individual organisms at level D is higher than the concentration in individuals at level A because DDT is. So remember, things are passed from each level. Like so. Energy is passed that way. Chemicals are passed that way as well, right? So when we spray the DDT all around, right, it's going across a wide field with the grass, all right, which would make it small concentrations like over a wider field of DDT. After that, a grasshopper comes and it needs to eat like, let's say like 5 different grass blades. Because it's eating 5 grass blades, it's also consuming everything that was absorbed through the soil of like that DDT of that one grass blade. So now it has 5 times the amount than the actual grass actually like absorbed because it ate 5 of them. Does that make sense? Let's say a snake came or a frog came and ate the grasshoppers, right? And it needed 100 grasshoppers to stay. Now it has 500 times more than the level at level A. And then let's say a hawk came or a snake came and ate 5 frogs. Now it has 5 2,500 times more, right? So the concentration is increasing as we go up the trophic levels, all right? So it says synthesized by organisms in level D is definitely not synthesized by organisms in level D. That's all the way wrong. Just cross that out. Excreted by organisms at level A as a toxic waste? Well, no, it's actually going to be absorbed in the soil. It's not a metabolic thing. It's a pesticide. It's a chemical that came from the outside, not what's being created on the inside. So it wouldn't be excreted. Remember, excretion is the removal of metabolic waste from an organism or a cell. Produced by organisms at level C, which are eaten by organisms at level D. Again, cannot be right. Pass through levels A, B, and C to organisms at level D. That's exactly right, which is what we just spoke about. It's going to be absorbed from the soil into level A. Level A, when it gets eaten, is going to be passed to level B. When level B organisms get eaten, it's going to be passed to level C. And level D is going to have the highest concentration because it's eating level C and it's at the top of the food pyramid. The chart below contains both autotrophic and heterotrophic organisms. All right. So row A has owl, cat, shark. Row B has mouse, corn, dog. Level C has squirrel, bluebird, and alga. Organisms that carry out only heterotrophic nutrition are found in what? So an owl, does it carry out heterotrophic nutrition? Does it need other organisms in order to eat, in order to obtain nutrients? Yes, it needs to eat. Cats also need to eat other organisms. Sharks also need to eat other organisms. So we know it'll be row A. Let's look at row B. Do mice eat other organisms? Yes. Does corn eat other organisms? No. Letter C. Do squirrels eat other organisms? Yes. Bluebirds? Yes. Alga, which are like plants of the ocean, do they? No. So it would have to be letter A, which is row A only. Number 4. Let me just erase and clear. Species of finches are represented in the diagram below. Finch diversity, right? The finch wheel. State the name of one species of finch from the diagram that is most likely to compete with the small tree finch if they lived on the same island. Support your answer with an explanation. So let me see if I can, nope, I cannot zoom in. Or maybe I can, oh yeah, I can. So let's kind of see. It's gonna be a little hard to see, but just stick with me, right? So it says, which one would compete with the small tree finch? So let's find the small tree finch. The small tree finch is here. All right. This says mainly animal food. Mainly animal food. So the small tree finch eats mainly animal food. What other finch also has the same credentials as the small tree finch? If you said the large tree finch, you're right. But why? Because they both literally feed on the same type of food, right? So if they lived on the same island, they feed on the same type of food. So they would be most likely to compete for those resources, right? All right. Base your answer to the following questions on the diagram below and on your knowledge of biology. The last known wolf native to the Adirondack Mountains of New York State was killed over a century ago. Several environmental groups have recently proposed reintroducing the wolf to the Adirondacks. These groups claim that there is sufficient prey to support a wolf population in this area. Sufficient prey equals animals that they're able to eat. There's enough animals for them to eat in order to survive. These prey include beaver, deer, and moose. Okay. Opponents of this proposal state that the Adirondacks already have a dominant predator, the eastern coyote. So there's already a predator that's in that region, which is the eastern coyote that feeds on those same animals, beavers, deers, and mooses, mice, meeses, meese? I don't know. But now they're saying, let's introduce wolves there, right? So state one effect the reintroduction of the wolf may have on the coyote population within the Adirondacks, and explain why it would have this effect. Well, if we introduce something else in the ecosystem that's also able to feed on the same thing that we're able to feed on, that's going to now create competition between them. If there's competition between them, then that means that the eastern coyote population would likely decrease because they might not have enough food because it might be eaten by the wolves or something of that. And they might not reproduce as often because they don't have enough food resources to maintain energy and reach reproductive age. That's how you guys need to be thinking. Okay? All right. Let's move on. Okay. Woo! Beaks of finches. So this is actually one of the state mandated labs that they wanted you guys to do. While I'm reading, let's go ahead and have you guys highlight. Part A, beaks of finches. Part of Darwin's voyage included a visit to the Galapagos Islands in the Pacific Ocean close to South America. Islands form a very important piece of evidence in Darwin's theory because they isolate populations from each other. Read the story below. A long time ago, a small flock of sparrow-like birds called finches were blown out to sea. Finches blown out to sea by a fierce storm. They lost their bearings, but flew on in search of the mainland, going further and further out to sea. At the point of exhaustion, 600 miles from home, they spotted a speck of land, an island in the middle of the sea. They were saved and could rest, so they could rest, drink, and feed before returning home. But this island was perfect. It had abundant seeds and other food, plenty of shelter, nesting sites, and amazingly, there were no predators or other birds to compete with. Sounds perfect. Imagine being trapped like in a mansion on an island by yourself that's like 2,500 square feet, big pool in the back, plenty of sun, plenty of fruits, vegetables, you know, all the dinner service that you possibly could eat. Nobody to bother you, no mom to bother you, no dad to bother you, no siblings to bother you, no phone. Like you're literally just living your life like it's golden. Life was much harder on the mainland. There was no need for the birds to move on because they had all their resources. Why am I going to go find food when I have food sitting right in front of me, right? Their numbers grew until they became just a bit too numerous for the little island. Some find it hard to find enough food for themselves or their offspring, and young birds were driven away from areas where food was available. Some birds were forced, whoa, my iPad fell, my bad. Some birds were forced to fly across the sea to nearby islands. There they found new territories, also with no predators or other birds to compete with. So they found new territories also with no predators or other birds to compete with. As the plants and their seeds were just a little different on each island. So plants and seeds, a little different on each island. Some birds were better than others at finding and eating the new food sources. Birds which could break open fruits and eat the seeds survived well enough. So birds that could break open fruits and eat the seeds survived well enough to produce lots of babies. Eventually, after a very long time, all the islands became occupied by these birds, but the finches on each island were slightly different. After a long period of time, scientists believe that this story is just the sort of scenario that happens when new volcanic islands, such as the Galapagos, are colonized by animals and plants. It shows how a theory has to include a plausible mechanism to explain events. The questions in this activity are similar to those in which scientists like Darwin would have to deal with when presenting his theory to other skeptical scientists. All right? So let's see what this actually all means. Here. I don't know why the answers are there already, but we'll still discuss them. So it says, explain why it is unlikely that more than one flock of birds would find the islands in this way at the same time. Well, the island was a long way from the mainland, right? and it was across a very large ocean, about 600 miles away, right? So more than one flock of birds, some birds are just not going to fly that far, right? Suggest two possible reasons why there were no predators on the island. Well, the island was new, right? So it didn't have a chance to be inhabited by predators. And there was not a lot of foods that were there, right? But the birds were able to get the food that they needed in order to survive there. Um, why were there no other birds to compete with? See question 1. Again, the island was new, so there were no other birds to compete with, one flock, right? Why might some finches survive better than others on the same food sources, right? So based on the size and the shape of their beaks, some birds were better able to eat the food that was actually there. If my beak is slightly different and I'm not able to crack open a seed covering as well as the next bird, then the next bird is going to be able to eat that food source, and I'm not going to be as well adaptations to eating those food sources. I don't know what's happening. All right. And then number 5. Why were the finches slightly different on each island? They evolved, right? And evolution is a change over time. So they evolved to feed on those seeds and other food sources, which were different on each island. So even though they're all finches, they're all slightly different. And primarily, the food was what was molding which birds would be able to survive on each island. If the seed is very small, you need a very small and like sharp beak in order to like pop one up and like be able to eat it, right? But if your beak is very large and you have like a large top bill and like a large bottom bill, you might not be able to pick up like a tiny seed as efficiently as a small bird. You would need to eat seeds that were very large in order to survive and reproduce, right? All right. So moving on. Part B, notes. All right. So a niche is an organism's job in an environment. All right. How an organism gets food determines / decides which niche / job it has. All right. So again, a niche is an organism's job in an environment, how an organism gets their food. Organisms in the same niche job compete and fight for resources, while organisms in different niches do not fight for those same resources, right? So I, as a human being, would not be competing with grasshoppers. Therefore, we don't occupy the same niche, right? Because we don't occupy the same niche, right? Grasshoppers live out in the forest. I live in my home here that you see behind me. And we also don't eat the same thing. You guys probably don't know this, but I actually don't eat grass. Grasshoppers, however, do eat grass, but they don't eat steak, and I love steak. So we would occupy two different niches. There's no need for us to compete. A grasshopper, however, would have to compete with like a deer or an elephant because they both live in a forested area or like a grassland, and they both eat the same type of food. So they occupy the same niche, a same specific habitat that's going to increase competition between the two. All right. So even though an elephant is much bigger than a grasshopper, they still feed on the same food sources. They occupy the same niche. Therefore, they're going to compete with each other. Right. All right. So that's it for day 4. Tomorrow, you guys are going to be talking about day 5, which is all about the pesticide DDT. And you'll see why the pros and cons for DDT. Please study, study, study. These are super important. And in the words of Alaska, bye.